Session 22, Understanding the Mind-Body Relationship.
Let's talk now about the mind-body relationship and health, psychosomatic medicine, psycho the mind, soma the body, and how psycho the mind has an effect on bodily health. Back in 1920, a doctor wrote a controversial article where he suggested that as much as 20% of physical ailments were caused by mental disturbances or unhappiness, mental causes. 1930, in the 30s, doctors wrote again and said as much as 30% of our illnesses and ill health are mind or mentally related. In the 40s, someone wrote 40%. In the 50s, it was boosted to 50%. At every stage that it was boosted, it was vigorously resisted by the established medical professionals of the day. In the 60s, it went to 60%. In the 70s to 70%. Today, there are virtually no medical practitioners who disagree with the statistic that at least 80% of all the ailments that you and I suffer in the course of our lifetimes are psychologically caused. Psycho the mind makes soma the body sick. As a matter of fact, I've had many doctors, many medical professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, and nurses in my courses who said that it's probably closer to 90, maybe even 95% of everything that we suffer, colds, flus, skin diseases, heart attacks, kidney disease, arthritis, strokes, up to and including cancer, are psychological in origin. So I want to talk today about stress and tension. I want to talk in this session about what it is in our mind that creates the situation in our bodies that makes us ill. Now we know, because we talked about this before, we talked about it many times, is that in a way we decide to get sick. Dr. Carl Simonton, who worked in Fort Worth, Texas for many years, wrote a wonderful book called Getting Well Again and did many excellent articles on the attitudinal aspects of disease. And he thought it was an interesting thing that people seem to decide to get sick in order to deal with a situation in life that was unpleasant for them. And the more serious the situation in life was, the more serious the illness they got. For instance, if they were feeling underappreciated at work, they got a cold. If they felt that they were hard done by at work, they got the flu. If they felt that their marriage or their relationship or their entire career was a shambles and they didn't want to deal with that, they would get things as serious as heart conditions, strokes, and even cancer. He also found that people decide to get well as deciding to get sick. And that as soon as a person decided to get well, all the power of modern medicine and all the power of the body's immune system would come to work to make them better again. Now, why are stress and tension? Well, let's talk about stress and tension. When we're talking about stress and tension, we know that stress and tension are manifestations of something being wrong with our view of the world. Stress and tension are the outward manifestations of our being unhappy with some aspect of our lives. Now, whenever we feel physical pain, if you touch a stove and it's hot and you feel physical pain, the reason we have the physical pain is to give us a warning that we are doing something that is harmful for us physically. The reason why we have stress and tension is to give us a signal that we are doing something in our lives that is harmful for us mentally. And unless we deal with the situation, eventually our mind will make the body sick, and the sickness is our way of avoiding dealing with the situation, right up to the point where we can actually make ourselves sick to death. Now, with regard to stress and tension, there is an entire new area of medicine today called psychoimmunology or psychoneuroimmunology, where they talk about the effect that the mind has on either weakening or strengthening your immune system. And they find that negative emotions, stress, tension, anxiety, anger, frustration of any kind actually depress the immune system. They depress antibody production, and they make you open, if you like, to all kinds of physical illnesses, including colds and flus and other things. Is that a person who is positive, optimistic, cheerful, enthusiastic, and has high self-esteem is usually a person who is resistant to virtually any of the normal diseases going around. But a person who is negative, depressed, pessimistic, down on themselves, cynical, if you like, low self-esteem, is a person whose antibody production is depressed and depressed and depressed. So sometimes they're sick all the time. And you find that negative people are often sick all the time. Now, the key point with regard to stress and tension is this, is that stress and tension come from within. They come from within, not from without. is that there is no such thing as a stressful situation. There is only a stressful reaction. There's only a stressful reaction. For example, two people face a situation. We've used this example before, like a traffic jam. Two people face the same situation. One becomes upset, the other one is still relaxed. Or the same person faces the same situation 2 different days. One day they react differently and become upset. The next day they react in a positive way and don't become upset at all. It is always contained in a reaction. It is not out there. It is in here where stress and tension come from. It is the way that we think and respond to our world, not the world itself. Someone once wrote that there are 3 major sources of stress. And if we took the human body like this, the 3 major sources of stress are what might have been. Remember we said that people worry about the past? What might have been is a major source of stress. We continually think about how it might have been different. And in the present, we think of what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And we think in terms of shoulds and oughts. And in the future, we think of what might happen. And these 3, what might have been, what should, as opposed to what is, and what might happen, are major sources of stress in our lives. But it's always the way we think about the past, the way we think about the future, the way we think about our present in relation to reality that causes the stress, not the stress itself. We know that you can decide not to be sick. I've said this to many people in my courses, is that you can decide never to have colds again. Everybody decides to have colds or not to have colds. And when I say that, people get really, some people get very tense. Why? It's because, perfect example, why is it that young mothers never have colds? Why is it that mothers with small children never have colds, never get sick? It's because they don't have time. If they make the mental decision that I don't have time, I have responsibilities in taking care of these children, which are so great that I cannot afford to get sick, and they don't get sick. They wait till the children grow up, go off to school, they have more time on their hands, they're spinning their wheels, or their kids grow up and go away, and then they go back to having colds and flus again. So you can decide not to be sick or not to have colds or flus by doing this very simple thing. Making the decision right now, you're never going to have a cold or flu again. Just make the decision right now, I am never going to have a cold again. And the next time you feel any cold symptoms in your body, just say, I feel terrific. I feel healthy. I feel happy. I feel terrific. I have health. I have no colds. And you know what happens? The cold will pack up and it'll go next door to Mrs. Brown, who believes in colds, and will leave you alone. And that is a fact. Well, we talked earlier about the relationship between stress and tension and energy. Now, there are 3 major sources of energy, according to a great body of work that was done at the beginning of this century. The first major source of energy is food, and the type of food we eat, and the way we eat it, and the way we combine it, and nutrition, and vitamins, minerals, and so on. The second is air, the way we breathe, the depth that we breathe, the amount of oxygen that we get in, the amount of aerobic exercise that we get, the amount of air and the type of air is a major source of energy. And the third is impressions. Now, impressions are the way we take what happens to us in the world around us. Remember we talked about a stressful reaction? One situation can energize a person, the same situation can depress another. For instance, a disappointment or the falling through of a deal or something failing temporarily can cause one person to become depressed and fatigued, cause the other person to be energized and ready to go back on the offensive. So impressions, the way that we take in what is happening around us, are a major source on whether of our energy, whether it goes up or whether it goes down. And one of the most important pieces of work that I ever read on the subject is a discussion of how our body is an energy generating machine, and it generates energy of different qualities like an oil refinery. And the best example I can give you is this. Imagine that your body takes in raw food, just meat, potatoes, vegetables, and so on, and this is the basic food stuff or energy that the body runs on. And if the body takes in 1,000 units of food, whatever that means, we could say 1,000 calories or 1,000 units of food, it can either be used at the physical level, as it is in most countries of the world, where it's all consumed in physical work, and at the end of the day, the person is exhausted, has no energy left, or as civilization advances, as our civilization advances, if it is not consumed in hard physical work, then it is further refined and it moves up the energy chain, and it translates into emotional energy. And it takes 1,000 units of physical energy to generate 100 units of emotional energy. Now, emotional energy is what we feel with. Emotional energy is how we respond. Emotional energy is our energy, our vitality, our enthusiasm, our excitement, our self-esteem, our joy for life, and so on. If the energy is not used at the emotional level, then the body continues to refine it, like a refinery. Imagine that the physical level is crude oil. We'll call this crude. This is crude oil, takes in raw meat and potatoes. The crude oil in the oil refinery is refined down, and it comes to refined oil, the kind of oil that you would use in your car. If it is not consumed there, the refinery refines it even more into what is called mental energy. Mental energy is the energy that we think with. Now, this cannot be proved scientifically. It can only be proved intuitively by reference to your own experience. This would be the equivalent of gasoline, where refined oil is further refined, but it takes 1,000 units of crude oil to get 100 units of refined oil to get 10 units of gasoline. And if it's not burned up at the mental level, then it goes up and it becomes 1 unit of what is called psychic energy, or what is often called creative energy. And this is the equivalent of, let us say, lighter fluid, a very, very fine form of energy. Now, what happens? Well, we know that if we work physically very, very hard at a sport or work in the yard or do something else, at the end of the day, we're exhausted. You ever been so tired at the end of a day that you don't have time, you don't want to argue, you don't want to make a decision, you don't want to get in anything, you're just physically exhausted and all of your energy is burned out? Well, this is because we burned it all up at the physical level. However, in most of our professions or jobs today, we don't burn up all of our energy at the physical level, so it rises to the emotional level. When we have the emotional energy, we look for an outlet, and our outlet is almost invariably our relationships. It can be other things, but almost invariably it's our relationships. We find an interesting thing is that positive emotions, if our emotions are positive, enthusiastic, joy, happiness, excitement, that we burn up very little of this energy, and the energy moves up into mental energy. If our mental world is positive, if we're working on positive projects, working on projects that are really interesting and challenging to us, then we develop this energy, again, being positive, moves up higher, and we develop psychic energy. And psychic energy is the energy of creation, where we come up with ideas and we have inspirations and we're enthusiastic and we're motivated and so on. However, the biggest problem, and this is the key, is that most people burn up all their energy at this level, at the emotional level. They don't use it at the physical level because they don't work hard enough, but at the emotional level, they burn it all up. So they have little energy left at the mental level and almost no energy left at the psychic level. And as we said before, that you are a mind with a body to carry yourself around in. Everything that you are or ever will be as a result of how you use your mind. If all of your energy is burned up at the emotional level through negativity, fear, anxiety, stress, tension, anger, whatever else it happens to be, if it's all burned up at the emotional level, you do not have any of what are called the higher forms of energy with which to make a great life, with which to make a wonderful life, to engage in happy, joyous activities, to be creative, to find solutions, to set goals, to believe in yourself, and so on and so forth. The reason why less than 5% of the population fulfill their potential in any given generation is that most of them are completely preoccupied with what is called the expression of negative emotions. And this is the key. It is the expression of negative emotions that burns up all of our energy at lower levels, so we do not have the energy at the higher levels with which to fulfill our potential. We said earlier that a positive mental attitude is essential for success, that 85% of everything that happens to you is going to be attitudinal, that 85% of your success is going to be caught up in the quality of your interactions and your relations with other people. In other words, 85% of your success in life is going to be involved in positive emotions. However, if you burn up all of your emotional energy at this level in the expression of negative emotions, talking about negative things, talking to yourself about negative things, thinking about negative things, discussing negative things, criticizing, condemning, complaining, and so on. If you do that, then what happens is you have no energy to come up here, and here is where the great joy, the great happiness, the great success of life is involved. So what is the solution? The solution to high levels of energy, happiness, inner peace, loving relationships, living a long time is to eliminate the expression of negative emotions. Eliminate the expression of negative emotions. This is one of the most important lessons I have ever learned in all of my years and tens of thousands of hours of study, is to eliminate the expression of negative emotions. That is the starting point of all personal growth. In fact, we said earlier, when we were talking about responsibility psychology, we said that the elimination of negative emotions is mandatory, not option. The elimination of the expression of negative emotions is the starting point of killing the negative emotions. If you do not express negative emotions, if you do not discuss negative emotions, if you do not get involved in negative conversations or negative self-talk, what happens is the negative emotions die. Because of the law of concentration, if you do not dwell upon a negative for any period of time, it loses its force and effect and dies on you. All the negative energy that would have been drained off by thinking about that negative emotion is available to you to do productive things. We know, and we'll talk about this later, but one outburst of anger, 5 minutes of uncontrolled anger, can burn up an entire day's worth of emotional energy in 5 minutes. That is why people who are angry all the time very seldom produce anything constructive. So we start by eliminating the expression of negative emotions. And how do we do that? We use some of the laws that we know about. The first and most important, of course, is the law of substitution. The law of substitution means that we find other things to say. Remember, the mind is not a vacuum. We concentrate, we use self-discipline to get our mind onto something that is positive. And by putting our mind on something that's positive, it's like shifting a light. By putting our mind on something that is positive, we cannot simultaneously think about our worry. We also know that if we get busy doing something that is constructive, the action itself, because it requires our mental and physical involvement, drives out the negative emotion. We're not saying to repress. So some people say, should you repress these emotions? Should you suppress them? I mean, if you feel like this, should you push them under the surface? No, not at all. We're saying this. Find reasons not to express. Find reasons not to be negative in the first place. Find reasons not to express negative emotions. Now, what are some of the reasons? Some of the simplest reasons of all is, I am responsible. When you say, I am responsible, it's very, very hard for you to blame someone else. Remember, we said that almost all negative emotions arise from our tendency to blame someone or something else or something in our lives that we're not happy about. When you say, I am responsible, I am responsible, I am responsible, I am responsible. When we say that over and over again, our tendency to be negative goes down, our tendency to be positive goes up. The more that we use the law of substitution by saying, I am responsible, the more our negative emotions weaken, and eventually you can get to the point where negative emotions have only a minuscule or a minor influence in your life. It's almost as though we have anything from 0% negative emotions to 100% negative emotions. In fact, one of the characteristics of healthy personality is that a healthy personality is a person who is on this end of the scale. Now, every one of us is somewhere on this scale, moving in one direction or the other. The question you have to ask yourself is, what percentage of your conversation, talk to yourself, what percentage of your conversation with others, what percentage of your thoughts are negative and destructive and devaluing, what percentage of them are positive, constructive, and uplifting. And your objective is to remember that everything counts, is that it is not possible for you or I to grow as human beings. It is not possible for us to evolve with our negative emotions intact. That the only way that we can achieve our potential is by working on ourselves continually to curb the tendency toward the expression of negative emotions. This brings us to another mental law, which is very important. It's called the law of habit. Remember the law of habit. The law of habit says that if in the absence of some external influence, we will go on acting the same way indefinitely. The expression of negative emotions is a habit. The expression of negative emotions is the primary reason why people fail to fulfill their potential. The expression of negative emotions is the number one reason why people fail in life. Why? It's because the expression is the outward manifestation of the inner mental condition. as we express negative emotions, and sometimes we suppress them, or we repress them, or we hold them inside, as we suppress or repress negative emotions or express them externally, they have exactly the same effect. Remember we talked about the law of expression? The law of expression says that whatever is impressed is expressed. That means that whatever we impress on the subconscious mind, through pictures, through words, through the things that we read, is expressed in our reality in that it manifests and becomes a part of our physical world. But we also talked about the law of reversibility. Remember, the law of reversibility says that just as the objective state creates the subjective state, in other words, the achieving of the goal gives us the feeling of being a winner, it also says the feeling of being a winner enables us to achieve the goal. The law of reversibility says that whatever is expressed is impressed. So that whatever you are saying to yourself or to other people, you are impressing on your subconscious mind, and it will simultaneously be expressed as a part of your reality. If you can understand this, I spent something like 1,000 hours studying this subject to get my mind around it. And I looked around me, and I've traveled all over the world. I looked around me and look at all these people that are unhappy and struggling and not successful, and I trying to figure out what it was. And it finally dawned on me in doing this reading that this was the answer, is that most people spend most of their time engaging in the expression of negative emotions, negative thoughts, negative ideas, negative opinions, negative criticism, devaluation, starting from early childhood, that leads to guilt, leads to feelings of worthlessness, leads to low self-esteem, fears of failure, fears of rejection, fears of loss, fears of lack, fears of limitation, fears of ill health, and so on. The expression of negative emotions is the key to understanding success and failure. So when we talk, as we have talked many times before, when we talk about how important it is to have a positive attitude, sometimes people will take this discussion that we're having and they'll say, well, that's just positive thinking. You're just doing positive thinking. I said, yes, but positive thinking equals mental health. Negative thinking equals mental illness. When we were talking about reprogramming your mind for success, we're talking about software for the brain, we talked about the importance of the reference group. The reference group are the people that you associate with. If you associate with people who habitually express negative emotions, it is the same as associating with people who have a communicable disease. And the communicable disease is underachievement and failure in life. 95% of everything that we say and do and think is determined by the external influences, by the power of suggestion around us. And you have a choice. You know that you have the capacity to do something great, to do something wonderful with your life. You know that you have the capacity to do far more than you've ever done before. You know that you have the capacity to earn more, to be happier, to achieve more, to get more peace of mind and satisfaction out of life than ever before. If you don't know that by this stage of this course, then I've not explained it properly. However, the key is this, is you must look at your life in terms of positive versus negative. You must look at your life in terms of everything counting. You must look at your life in terms of all of the influences that you allow into your suggestive environment. You must look at your life in terms of the people. You must look at your life in terms of the television programs. Television programs, the average person watches 3 to 5 murders, rapes, or violent assaults every single night on television. The average adult has seen over 20,000 violent deaths on television by the time they've reached adulthood, watching television from early childhood. Does this have an effect on your life? Does it have an effect on your attitude? Does it have an effect on your success? The law of correspondence says that each person has within them a mental program or a mental equivalent. And everything in your external world will be exactly consistent, exactly in harmony with that mental equivalent. If you wish to change your external reality to something positive, something wonderful, something happy, something exciting, the starting point is to eliminate negative influences, eliminate the expression of negative emotions, get away from negative people, get away from negative books, negative magazines, negative television programs, and keep your mind focused singly on the things that you want to be, have, and do. This is the starting point of mental health, physical health, and all success and happiness in life.